We're switching it up. Long format. I recently complained on social media that I don't love short form content for what I'm trying to do. There's too much I want to get into in terms of the politics, history, personal experience with all these different cuisines that I just can't right now with short form content. And I'm okay with that. So I'm making this switch. With that, I am looking for feedback. Sorry if you can hear my dog in the background. She wants to be right at my feet. I am looking for feedback. So I'm looking for things about my delivery, my tone, flow, all that good jazz. I will note in this video, you're going to see some of the cooking shots are going to be, I think actually all the cooking shots are going to be in that vertical format. I'm so sorry. I made the decision to go long format afterwards. But I do think this supports what I am trying to do way better. So yeah, please leave any feedback for me. I'm looking to grow. With all that said, we're going to jump right into this new country. And for this first section, I am going to read what I have written verbatim because part of it is a quote. That our abhorrence of the scheme of African colonization is not in the slightest degree abated. That we recognize in it the most intense hatred of the colored race, clad in the garb of pretended philanthropy, and that we regard the revival of colonization societies in various sections of the Union and the expulsion of colored citizens from Delaware, Indiana, Iowa, and more recently from Illinois as kindred manifestations of a passion fit only for demons to indulge in. This is what former slave, abolitionist, author, and bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, Reverend Jermaine Wesley Logan, said of the American Colonization Society. A society founded by a white man, Robert Finley, as a way to relocate the inferior, newly freed Black Americans comfortably away from the white Americans under the guise of positive repatriation. A society responsible for forcing Zulu Duma, a Basade ruler, to sell Cape Mesurado as Robert F. Stockton held a gun to his head. A society supported by Abraham Lincoln, Henry Clay, James Monroe, and Francis Scott Key that formed the colonies of Mississippi in Africa, Kentucky in Africa, and the Republic of Maryland, displacing native Kru, Grebo, and other ethnic groups until their annexation into what is now modern-day Liberia. I told you, we're going to get spicy, team. All countries have complex histories, confusing positives and negatives within their culture, a complex set of morals and ethics. Like we discussed with Syria, conflict doesn't dictate the morality of a culture. But in the case of Liberia, we really can't divorce this history from the food and culture. Prior to the efforts of the American Colonization Society, the lands of what is now modern-day Liberia were inhabited by a variety of ethnic groups. Power shifted and flowed between the Mane, the Vai, the Kru, amongst others. These ethnic groups are really what set up the basis for the cuisine of Liberia. It's deeply West African. Oh, I swear to God, Shelly. Hi, can you sit? Can you sit? You just want to be needy? She hates when I take off her collar. Okay. Like other cuisines of West Africa, the starch is typically a rice or a swallow. Swallows are cooked and pounded starches that form a dough-like stretchy food. In the case of Liberia, the two main swallows of choice are fufu and damboy, both of which are made from cassava. One is made with a fermented cassava, the other one is made with fresh cassava. Again, like other cuisines of West Africa, these swallows are typically served alongside a stew, often referred to as a soup, despite the fact that it is technically a stew frequently. These stews are spectacularly flavored with hot peppers, cooked in palm oil, and feature a balance between bitter, savory, and spicy. But if it's so similar to West African cuisine, because it is a West African cuisine, and a lot of that's shared across, regardless of borders, why open with a quote about the American Colonization Society? Again, I'm going to read some of this out so I don't get numbers and dates wrong, so bear with me as I look to the side. Starting in 1822, freed slaves from the United States started making the journey back to Africa from the United States via American Colonization Society ships. But the vast majority of these freed slaves were born and raised in the United States and have never come into contact with any of the cultures of Africa on native soil, nor the tropical diseases present in Africa. Of the 4,571 freed slaves who arrived up until 1843, less than 40% survived. That is an insane statistic. I can't fully wrap my mind around that. These new arrivals were referred to as Americo-Liberians. They were ethnically diverse, not necessarily even fully West African. They had no identification with the indigenous peoples of what is now modern-day Liberia. They were educated in American systems and culture, not African systems and culture. And they were almost entirely Protestant Christian, all of which deeply clashed with the native peoples of Liberia. As Americo-Liberians took control of the government that was starting to form there, they started to push and encourage the growth of civilized values. This usually resulted in trying to squash the native witchcraft belief systems that existed in the indigenous cultures, pushing for hoop skirts and suits as a superior form of clothing over the indigenous clothing, and highly encouraging positive relationships with Western entities that really only took advantage of the land, the culture, and the people. This resulted in the presence of ingredients like wheat, and Liberia to this day has one of the stronger cultures of baking wheat breads in West Africa. There's obviously exceptions. I think immediately of Nigerian agege bread, which is fantastic, but Liberia does have a stronger culture of cooking these Western ingredients. You see remnants of quintessential Southern American dishes also arise. Think the ghost of shrimp and grits in a classically West African dish. One example that comes to mind of Americo-Liberian influence on West African cuisine is actually a very specific recipe for pepper soup that I found when I was first cooking through Liberia. Unfortunately, I have not been able to find this exact version of pepper soup again. I've even used the Wayback Machine because I have the link to the blog post, and even it can't help me. I'm losing my noggin over it because it was so interesting. In this blog post, the writer describes how they come from an Americo-Liberian family and that their version of pepper soup is significantly clearer than other ethnic varieties of this soup, and they don't use things like keteli, bitterball, okra. For me, it reminded me of like a goaty and noodleless chicken noodle soup that was like amazing for sick days. It was a nice, clear, consomme-like broth with nice little pieces of goat and a nice, whole, hearty serving of habanero chilies in it. It was fantastic. Before I talk about the dishes that I made for this video, I do want to talk about modern-day Liberia, which frequently in the West is portrayed very intensely, especially in the US. There were modern-day slavery charges in the 1930s, and between the 1950s and the 2000s, there was a swell of coups and dictators. But since then, the people of Liberia have really been fighting to make for a more equitable and fair society. In 2005, they had a wildly successful election in which they collectively picked Africa's first female president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Since then, elections do get contested and heated. I think most countries in the world can understand that, but they have experienced a wonderful wave of really trying to make for more equality, fairness, and people's representation in the country. It's obviously not perfect, but I do think we need to call out where there have been some really positive changes. All of this sets a very important backdrop to Liberian cuisine. It is arguably deeply West African, but the American Colonization Society still has impacts on the cuisine today via the Americo-Liberians that are a part of the country. And I think a really good example of that is actually the fact that I accidentally made a Thanksgiving meal for this video. Liberia is actually one of the few countries outside of the US that celebrates American Thanksgiving, particularly in Americo-Liberian families, where turkey is typically the star in a US household for Thanksgiving. In Liberia, the star of that table is chicken gravy, a rich, tomatoey, spicy chicken dish that is covered in this gorgeous, luscious sauce. This is such a standout dish in this challenge for me. When I think about what's the dish that really just switch went off in my head, that was like, I gotta keep doing this. This is so fun. It's this dish specifically, chicken gravy. I cannot express how much I love the smell that permeates my home when I make this. To give you an idea, somebody in my neighborhood was walking by and literally stopped me to ask what the heck I was making because it smelled so good. And they're like, can I have that recipe? So the version of chicken gravy that I made is actually from an Americo-Liberian chef, and I did notice something really interesting. It's missing what I usually think of as a key ingredient in West African cuisine. It's what you always start with, and that is red palm oil. I will say red palm oil, for those who are not used to it, it's got a really pungent and intense smell that does lend to a great flavor. It cooks down beautifully, specifically with onions. But I did find some very light documentation that historically Americo-Liberians were slow to adopt red palm oil, but that isn't exactly the case anymore. I paired the chicken gravy with a stewed collard green dish. The fact that I have a stewed collard green dish, or collard greens at all, on my favorites list is crazy to me. I hate collard greens. I don't know what it is. I want to like them, but I just don't. Even when an incredibly talented chef cooks collard greens for me, it still tastes like I'm eating a penny. I cannot get over it. But my very southern husband loves them. So when I was initially cooking this, I thought, I'm going to throw him a bone. I know he likes collard greens. This is a really important ingredient. Who knows? Maybe I'll change my mind. I went into it very doubting. Turns out that I like collard greens in a West African context. If it's stewed with smoky bacon and peanut butter, and it just makes this delicious, rich sauce, it was so good. I was so shocked at how much I loved this. It's amazing, especially next to the spicy and meatiness of the chicken gravy. These collard greens paired really beautifully. I will note that the recipe calls for also adding a smoked flounder to the dish, and I opted not to do that just because I wanted a little less meat, but I can only imagine the flavor bomb that additional smoky, fishy umami would provide for the collard greens. I did make my own swallow as well. In this case, I made dumboy, which is made out of fresh cassava, which many argue is the national dish of Liberia. I will say, if you are looking to do that challenge, you want to make your own swallow, whichever swallow it is, I do recommend having a high-speed blender or a high-speed food processor to make it. It makes it significantly easier. You can absolutely go for the traditional pounding method, but I will absolutely note it takes a lot of practice, a lot of upper body strength and patience, and a lot of training to really understand the visual cues that you're looking for. If you're going to make a Liberian meal, or really any West African meal, I highly recommend eating with your hands. Because of the saucy, stewy nature of Liberian food, it can be really tricky for Westerners, and it's often diametrically opposed to kind of our mindset around cleanliness with our hands while eating. But I do think it's important to understand how people traditionally and still to this day eat this food. As always, my Notion page houses recipes, playlists, and menu suggestions on how you can explore Liberian cuisine. Next time, we're heading almost exactly due north to a country within a country that is kind of infamous and notorious for its cuisine. Until then, remember, there's a whole world waiting for you in the kitchen.